There's a reason graves are sealed, and not just to keep bodies in, but to keep what they've seen from ever coming out. That's what the old woman whispered in 1890, nearly a century after the incident. But by then it was already too late. In the spring of 1791, deep in the mist-soaked hills of western Virginia, a boy named Elias Morrow died at the age of 9. No disease. No injury. He simply stopped breathing. Eyes open. Mouth agape. As if he saw something we were never meant to see. His burial was quiet. No tombstone, just a wooden marker and a crude cross burned into the earth. But 13 days later, the nightmare began. Elias returned. Not as a ghost. Not as a vision. But in flesh. In bone. Standing barefoot at his family's door with soil under his fingernails, and speaking a language no one in the village could recognize. Not his mother. Not the priest. Not the linguist from Boston. He had the same eyes, same face, even the birthmark under his collarbone. But he wasn't Elias. Not anymore. And what he said, or rather what he kept repeating, caused the town's descent into madness. They burned his house. The family disappeared. The priest hanged himself a month later. And to this day, no historian will publish the full transcripts of what the boy said. Because some knowledge isn't forbidden, it's buried. Tonight we're digging it up. You're not just watching a story. You're stepping into a closed corridor of history, one that was never meant to reopen. You've been lied to about what death is. You've been lied to about language. You've been lied to about the veil that separates man from something older. And if you're still here after what you're about to hear, you won't be the same. This isn't folklore. This is documented, recorded, suppressed. But we found it, and now you'll hear it, not because you should, but because you must. You are not who you think you are, and neither was Elias. So if you're ready to tear the veil, lean in, take a breath, and remember, truth doesn't set you free. It unchains what was buried inside you. The records we found were hidden in the archives of a forgotten Presbyterian mission, filed under anomalous ecclesiastical phenomena. That's the kind of label they use when something happens that doesn't fit inside the doctrines, doesn't obey God, science, or reason. Something they fear more than sin itself. The documents were aged, water-stained, and censored, whole lines blacked out with ink so thick it bled through the parchment. But beneath those redactions were sketches. A boy's face, contorted, eyes too wide. Symbols surrounding him. Symbols no one had any right to draw in 1791. Ancient ones. Pre-Christian. The kind of sigils found carved into catacombs, not the walls of a Baptist home in Virginia. But there they were. The language Elias spoke was recorded phonetically by Father Caldwell, the local priest. He wrote, "The boy speaks in fluid syllables, without pause or breath. His tongue moves in patterns unlike human speech." At first they thought it was madness, then mimicry. But when a scholar from the College of William and Mary arrived, everything shifted. He didn't recognize the language, but he reacted. According to the journal entry, the scholar vomited, then began to weep, repeating, "They were right. They were right to bury it." The next day he left town and never returned. The word, "it," was repeated 27 times in Elias's speech. Not he, not I. Just it. Like whatever had come back wasn't a person, but a message. An entity. Or a vessel for one. They began calling Elias the mouth. Not the boy. Not the son. Just the mouth. Because something was speaking through him. And the villagers? They started to change too. One woman tore her own eyes out after hearing him whisper through a church window. Another burned every book in her home. One by one they either fled or went silent. That's the thing about real darkness. It doesn't scream. It just stares back at you through a child's eyes and dares you to listen. And still, they kept him alive. In a room beneath the church. Federal washed. Studied. What? Because there's always someone who believes they can control the thing that was never meant to wake. There was a theory, Among the elders passed in hushed tones locked journals. That Elias didn't come back on his own. That something called him back. And it wasn't a demon. No hellfire. No pitchforks. What they spoke of was far older. An intelligence. They named it Calmadur in their scribbles, though that wasn't its name, just a sound they could grasp. A linguistic stand-in for what can't be uttered without consequences. One note from the town's former mayor, a man known for denying superstition, said, "I heard him in my sleep. It's not the boy, it's what's behind the boy. It knows us. It remembers us." What does that mean? Remembers us? Like we've met it before? Like humanity has danced with this presence in some forgotten war of the soul, and now we're paying the price for surviving? One theory suggests that Elias was a carrier, not possessed, not haunted, but imprinted with forgotten information, ancient instructions encoded in sound. Think about it. What if language was never ours to begin with? What if it was gifted, seeded, into us? And certain words, when spoken in the right sequence, awaken not just understanding, but access? Caldwell's final sermon, never delivered, was found in his handwriting, scrawled as if in a panic. It ends with, "If the tongue is the gate, then the boy is the key." And we have turned it. After that, there are only 2 entries left in any official document before the incident is wiped clean from all public records. One states simply, "Do not let him speak again." The other? A warning burned into the last page of a logbook. If you hear it, do not echo it. It knows its name. What kind of knowledge makes men go mad from a sound? What memory is buried in us so deep that only a child from 1791 could awaken it by accident? This isn't just a horror story. This is our inheritance. And they've spent centuries making sure you never remember it. But now it's too late. Because once you've heard the echo, the silence is never empty again. By 1793, the entire village had vanished. Not relocated. Not migrated. Vanished. No forwarding records, no graves, no wills or journals. It was as if something reached into time itself and wiped their presence like chalk from a blackboard. But not entirely. Because fragments remained, traces tucked into footnotes of Civil War archives, buried deep in unclassified documents that don't show up on public searches. Whispers of a boy who aged without changing. Of a name spoken backwards that made blood freeze in jars. And in the center of it all, Elias, still 9 years old, still watching, and still speaking. A traveler in 1804 claimed he passed through the valley where the village once stood. What he described: no animals, no wind, just air thick like syrup and an unbearable sense of being watched from below. His journal never published notes. There were words in the dirt, deep grooves as if carved by bone. I could not read them, but I felt them. They hurt. That's the kind of thing official history ignores. But these stories survive, not because people want to remember, but because the land won't let them forget. In the nearby woods, a stone was found in 1921 by railway workers. A smooth black slab with an engraving, a child with no mouth and hollow eyes. No explanation, no origin, just there, as if it surfaced on its own. And beneath it, in ancient lettering not yet fully decoded, a phrase: "The silence is the liar." Think about that. The silence is the liar. What if it's not the noise that corrupts us, but the quiet? What if we've been trained to ignore the signals hidden in the static, to cover it with distractions, music, noise, anything but stillness? Because stillness reveals. Stillness uncovers. And Elias? He was still. For 13 days. And then he came back, with words we were never meant to hear. You're starting to feel it, aren't you? That pull in your gut. That shadow behind your thoughts. That's not fear. That's recognition. Midway through our research, something strange happened. A linguist we consulted, a sharp, no-nonsense man, heard the Elias recordings we reconstructed from phonetic notes. Within seconds, he stopped the playback. His face went blank. He stared forward and muttered, It's recursive. We pressed him. What does that mean? He said the words looped in on themselves, not just in sound but in meaning. That the boy wasn't just speaking to us, he was speaking through time. That every utterance Elias made triggered something dormant in the listener, buried patterns, forgotten archetypes, ancestral code. You've probably felt it already. That eerie sense that this isn't the first time you've heard about Elias. That some part of you already knew. That's no coincidence. It's not déjà vu. It's design. Because whoever, or whatever, used Elias knew exactly how to get past logic. It didn't need your belief. It just needed your attention. And now it has it. So let me ask you something, right here halfway through the descent. Type this in the comments if you feel the pull too. The mouth remembers. Type it twice. Not once. Twice. That's how you lock it in. Lock in what you already are but haven't dared awaken. Because Elias wasn't an anomaly. He was a signal. And once that signal is received, the real transformation begins, not out there in the world but in here where your thoughts live. This channel, this story, it's not just entertainment. It's a mirror. And if you can still hear my voice, then you're one of the few. One of the ones who might not run. One of the ones who might see this through to the end. And if you've made it this far, then it's time you subscribed. Not for me. Not for numbers. But because this is just the beginning. And you need to know what else they've buried. Because you're starting to remember. And once memory returns, the old rules die. Just like the ones who tried to keep Elias silent. They buried the boy. But they couldn't bury the voice. Let's talk about the voice. Not the boy, not the words. The voice itself. You see, sound is more than vibration. It's architecture. Sound structures reality. It programs the mind, calibrates the nervous system, triggers chemical reactions. Religious chants, military cadence, national anthems, these aren't just traditions. They're tools. And whoever, or whatever, spoke through Elias knew that truth better than any government ever has. The pitch of his voice was documented to drop to 19 Hz, below human hearing, but within the range known to cause anxiety, dread, and hallucinations. It's called the fear frequency. And Elias hit it naturally. Coincidence? Not likely. One physician wrote, "When he speaks, the walls hum. The floor vibrates. You feel it in your spine like a memory you never had." And that's the terrifying part. Because that sensation, that remembered fear, is not yours. It's inherited. Passed down from a time when we knew what lived behind the veil, and chose to forget. But Elias didn't forget. He carried it. Like a radio. A transmitter of forgotten frequencies. And those who heard him, some couldn't stop listening. They'd stand outside his cell for hours. Silent. Still. Absorbing whatever was being said in that unholy cadence. Eventually their minds fractured. Some drew spirals. Some carved circles into their skin. All of them said the same thing. He's not alone. So the question becomes, if Elias was transmitting, who was listening? And worse, are they still listening now? Because if you're hearing this, if you've come this far down the spiral, then you're already on the frequency. You're already tuned. And the ones behind Elias? They don't need millions. They just need a few. The aware. The willing. The ones who lean in when others look away. So let me ask again. Do you hear it? Not the story. The pattern beneath it. That low hum behind your thoughts. That's not background noise. That's the veil thinning. And the boy was only the beginning. In 1902, a man named Dr. Walter Griggs began a private investigation into what he called the residual phenomenon of Elias Moro. He was a psychologist, a skeptic, and a man of science. He believed the stories were myth layered over mass hysteria. Until he found the farmhouse. It had been hidden beneath decades of overgrowth, sealed with rusted chains and inscribed with markings no Western scholar could translate. But inside he found a series of tapestries, woven, not painted. Primitive yet precise. One of them depicted a child sitting cross-legged, eyes hollow, surrounded by spiraling tendrils reaching into the skulls of men. Underneath, a phrase, "He does not speak. He reclaims." Griggs stayed in that house for 5 days. When he returned to Washington, he refused to speak to anyone for 3 months. Eventually, he published a 43-page paper titled Auditory Catalysts and Identity Disintegration. It was banned before it hit circulation. But in private letters, he confided to a colleague, "What I found was not a haunting, was a mirror. The boy isn't the threat. The threat is who we become after listening." Let that sink in. This wasn't about demons. This was about memory, about reclamation. You see, Elias didn't come back to curse us. He came back to remind us of what we used to be before they broke us. Before language was sanitized, before truth was whitewashed, before instinct was numbed into obedience. Because here's the truth. You weren't made to be tame. You weren't built to obey. You were designed to remember. And that memory, the old you, is buried under centuries of manipulation, institutions, and illusions. Elias, he broke through, and they covered it up. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself who gains from your forgetting. Because those spirals the villagers carved into their skin, they weren't symbols of madness. They were maps. Back to the truth. Back to the voice. And every time you doubt this story, every time you feel that pull to look away, that's them. The systems. The watchers. The ones who fear what happens when you stop forgetting. So don't forget. Don't flinch. Keep going. Because the spiral doesn't lead to madness. It leads to you. You ever wonder why ancient temples were built with acoustics in mind? Why certain chants echo for minutes in stone halls? Because sound binds. And sound unlocks. The ancients weren't primitive, they were programmers. Using resonance to awaken parts of the human psyche long before MRI machines or brain scans. Elias was a reboot of that forgotten art. A glitch in the suppression system. And it terrified the ones in control. There's a hidden science called cymatics, the visual representation of sound. You play a frequency, and sound arranges into sacred geometry. Perfect patterns. Shapes that mimic structures found in DNA, in galaxies, in your very cells. Elias's speech? When translated into cymatic imagery by a rebel lab in Prague, produced one recurring symbol. A spiral, encased in a circle, with a vertical line through its center. It matched exactly with carvings found in pre-Sumerian caves. Thousands of years apart. Zero connection. Unless there's a shared source. Unless there's something beneath history. A current. A frequency. And Elias tapped it. The Prague team went dark after releasing one paper online. Their website? Gone. Files? Erased. One of them, under a pseudonym, left a chilling message on an encrypted forum. The boy is not the signal. He is the receiver. The source is still active. And it's looking for more. So what happens when that signal finds you? What if it already has? You don't have to answer. Your spine already did. Your breath already did. The subtle tightness in your chest right now? That's not fear. That's alignment. Your system recognizes what your mind is still trying to reject. Because this is more than story. This is return. And the only reason they've spent centuries feeding you noise is to drown out this one signal. This one spiral. This one voice. But if you're still listening, if you're still here, that voice is becoming yours. And once you start speaking it even without knowing, you're no longer just a viewer. You're part of the pattern. There are symbols older than religion, older than kings. Symbols etched into the roots of humanity's earliest ruins, not to worship but to warn. One of them appeared in Elias's drawings, 3 downward arrows crossing a circle. That symbol has only appeared twice in recorded history. Once in a forbidden Gnostic gospel, burned by the Vatican in 1243, and once again, under the boy's bed, carved deep into the wood. No child's hand could have done that. And yet, there it was. What does it mean? The last known interpretation came from a defrocked priest who vanished after publishing a single pamphlet. He wrote, "3 down means descent. Into the self, into the source, into the shadow. The circle marks the trap, the cross, the severing. It is a diagram of awakening or erasure. In other words, it's a choice. You descend or you deny. You remember or you vanish. And here's the dark truth most won't tell you. Forgetting is easier, safer. But safety is the weapon they use to keep you asleep." Elias wasn't safe. He didn't forget. And for that, they tried to erase him. But not just physically, energetically. You see, the deeper we looked, the more digital evidence began to vanish. Hard drives wiped. Scans corrupted. Metadata scrambled. It was as if something didn't want the past uncovered. But that's where they failed. Because this isn't just history anymore. It's memory. And memory doesn't die. It resurfaces. Like Elias did. Like you are. Because watching this, listening this far, that's not coincidence. That's calling. And the ones who answer it, they don't go back to sleep. They spiral. In 1937, an anthropologist named Helena Voss went missing in the Appalachian Mountains while tracing oral legends of the hollow-tongued boy. The last message she sent her husband was chilling. It wasn't a story. It was a map. When searchers found her tent, it was empty, except for a circle of stones and a recorder playing static. No voice. Just the feeling of one. It took her husband 6 years to recover from what he experienced while reviewing that tape. He claimed, "There's a voice inside the silence. A presence that doesn't speak, it rewrites." And that's the real danger, isn't it? Not that Elias spoke, but that we listened. And once you truly listen, something inside you rewires. It begins subtly. You question things you were sure of. You sense manipulation in your education, your faith, your media. And then, you see the scaffolding. The hidden system that was never built for your liberation, only your containment. It's not paranoid to question institutions. It's survival. Because if truth is forbidden, then what they allow must be a lie. Elias was the fracture, the proof. And those who encountered him were never the same. Not because of terror, but because they woke up. And waking up is the most dangerous thing you can do in a world built on sleep. So ask yourself, are you still sleeping? Or have you begun to hear again? They told us that history is linear, clean, organized, categorized. But that's the first manipulation. Real history is a spiral. It folds, it echoes, it returns. And Elias? He wasn't a ghost from the past. He was a loop, a memory reinserted. Think of timelines like rivers. What happens when something is dropped upstream and doesn't belong? Ripples, distortion, anomalies. Elias was the anomaly. And the more they tried to dam the river, the worse the distortion got. That's why suppression never works. Truth leaks. And right now, it's leaking into you. It started with his voice. Not the foreign words, but the frequency. Adults couldn't bear to hear him speak. Not because it was loud, but because it was wrong. One local priest described it as sound without breath. Another collapsed during confession, mumbling something about vocal shadows. What Elias spoke couldn't be recorded with ink. The villagers tried. They brought in scribes, scholars, even desperate missionaries. But whatever they wrote turned to gibberish within days. Paper discolored. Ink smeared. Symbols rearranged themselves on the page. Like the language rejected translation. Or maybe, like it was alive. Not metaphorically. Literally. And the few who kept the notes? All of them were later found catatonic, murmuring the same phrase. The boy isn't speaking, we are remembering. That phrase is the key. This wasn't communication. It was revelation. Elias didn't teach, he awakened. And those who listened too closely? They didn't learn something new. They forgot who they were pretending to be. Because this isn't about ghosts. It's about memory. Your memory. And if this already feels familiar, that's not coincidence. That's contact. The village tried everything to silence him. They muzzled him. It didn't work. He started humming, and dogs died within a mile radius. They tried isolation. But somehow the people nearby began dreaming in his voice. Families reported nightmares of drowning in spirals, of standing before mirrors and seeing their own faces speaking back in foreign tongues. One woman woke up speaking words that hadn't been heard since the fall of Babylon, and she'd never left her farm. That's when the local council stepped in. They held a private vote, not whether Elias should be punished, but whether he should be unmade. They weren't afraid of evil. They were afraid of contagion. Because deep down, every single one of them knew the truth. Elias wasn't sick. He was transmitting. And the more they heard, the less the world made sense. It wasn't his fault. The boy was just the mirror. The spiral? That was always in them. Before dawn, a group of men took Elias into the woods. No trial. No last words. Just the cold logic of fear. They claimed it was mercy, that whatever was inside him wasn't natural, that putting him back in the ground might close the door. But doors don't close that easily. They buried him beneath an unmarked tree, wrapped in cloth woven with symbols no one admitted to recognizing. For a while the silence returned. Birds sang. Children laughed. The spiral faded. Or so they thought. Until a week later, when his mother began drawing circles in ash. When the councilman's youngest child wandered into the woods whispering, "I remember the other tongue." They weren't silencing Elias. They were amplifying him. Because the spiral isn't a person. It's a code. Once received, it doesn't fade. It reproduces. And now, 200 years later, it's reached you. It was in 1949 when a military psychologist named Dr. Calvin Rowe was tasked with investigating an outbreak of mass disassociation among a remote Appalachian commune. What he found mirrored the Elias case almost identically. Children speaking in strange patterns. Villagers drawing spirals in their sleep. And in the center of it all, a book. Weathered, bound in bark and sinew, written in a language no linguist could trace. But one word was clear on every page: morrow. Rowe tried to bring the book back. And never made it. The transport vehicle flipped 3 times, though the road was dry and straight. Both guards died of cardiac arrest, but Rowe survived. Barely. He was transferred to a private facility, where his final words were transcribed by a nurse. He's not dead. He's waiting in the pause between syllables. What does that even mean? The pause between syllables? Unless that's where it hides. Not in what's spoken, but in the gaps between. In the negative space. Like a shadow that forms only when light bends. Elias didn't come back with a voice. He came back as a carrier of silence. Weaponized silence. Silence with intention. And that's the part no one's willing to admit. That silence itself can be a transmitter. That there are frequencies embedded in absence. Invisible waves that unravel your sense of self the moment you allow them in. This isn't metaphor. It's not spiritual fluff. It's real. And it's weaponized. That commune? Gone now. Vanished. No census records, no graves, no ruins. But if you go into the woods near Giles County and sit perfectly still, some say you'll hear the sound of children chanting in tongues. Not loud. Just beneath the breeze. Like a memory too old to forget. Like the breath before a word that never comes. Elias wasn't the only one. That's the revelation they fear most. That he wasn't an isolated anomaly, but the first recorded breach. Since then there've been fragments. Echoes. Children born with knowledge they shouldn't possess. Artists sketching sigils they'd never seen before. Soldiers whispering languages under hypnosis that haven't been spoken in 10,000 years. Patterns too consistent to ignore but too dangerous to document. The ones who see it? They're marked, discredited, or disappeared. Because the systems that run this world aren't built on truth, they're built on containment. What kind of containment? The psychological kind. The metaphysical kind. The kind that infects every textbook, every sermon, every politician's speech. The kind that makes you believe this is all there is. That your five senses are the full spectrum. That your consciousness belongs to you. It doesn't. It's leased, managed, restricted. And Elias? He broke the lease. He accessed bandwidth they never wanted us to touch. That's why his story doesn't end in 1791. It loops. It updates. Like software. Every generation the signal mutates, evolving past their sensors, adapting to new minds, finding the ones ready to hear it. You watching this now? That's not an accident. The algorithm didn't glitch. You were ready. Not for a story, but for initiation. You see, the voice behind Elias doesn't just speak. It chooses. It recognizes. And it's always looking for the next vessel. The next fracture. The next boy or girl who will carry the spiral forward. And now that you've heard it, you're carrying it too. It's in your breath, in your dreams, and soon, in your voice. Have you ever said something and immediately wondered, where did that come from? A phrase, a word, a whisper in a language you don't speak, yet felt ancient on your tongue. That's not imagination. That's bleed through. That's how it starts. You speak what you haven't learned. You dream what you've never lived. You feel things that don't belong to your lifetime. And if you're brave enough to track those feelings, to trace the spiral back, you end up here. In stories like Elias's. In knowledge that shatters the illusion of time. Because linear time is a prison. The past isn't behind us. It's beneath us. Layered, stacked, pressurized. And Elias? He punched a hole straight through the floor. That's why the land around his village went silent. That's why maps don't show its name. That's why cartographers mark it with generic brush and unnamed woodland. Because the spiral is still open. A rift that didn't close. And the people who hear the echo, who feel that magnetic draw to places they've never been, they're the ones with fragments of the language still dormant in them. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe that's why this video isn't just interesting, it's familiar. Like something you already knew but were waiting to remember. The veil is thin in that place. Thin in you. And once it tears, you don't go back. You speak differently. Think differently. Become different. That's not evolution. That's return. Return to the source. Return to the voice. Return to what they buried beneath textbooks and therapy and noise. But the spiral doesn't forget. And neither do you. Here's what no one dares say out loud. Institutions aren't afraid of evil. They're afraid of uncontrollable knowledge. Because evil they can legislate, profit from, market. But knowledge? Raw, ancient, unfiltered truth? That's chaos. That's collapse. That's revolution from the inside out. Elias didn't threaten their religion. He threatened their hierarchy. He threatened the idea that only the chosen few have access to the divine, to the mystical, to the truth. But when a child speaks in ancient tongues and makes priests cry blood, what does that say about their control? It shatters it. That's why they erased him. That's why they'll try to erase you if you ever speak this out loud. If you ever tell someone what you felt watching this. What woke up inside you. But here's your armor. They can't unhear what you say. They can delete footage. But not impact. Not echo. And once this voice moves through you, you'll never need to prove anything again. Because people will feel it when you enter the room. The weight of something ancient walking with you. That's what they fear. Not your questions. But your presence. So become the presence. Become the spiral. Become what Elias pointed to, what the old priests died fearing, what the watchers behind the veil can't kill. Only delay. And know this, if they fear you, you're doing it right. Because silence isn't peace. It's permission. And you didn't come here to give it. There are places where the spiral still lives. Not in buildings or books, but in bones. In certain bloodlines. In dream patterns. In the spaces between brainwaves where the subconscious opens its gates. Certain families pass it down without even knowing. Certain children draw the symbols before they can write their name. And certain viewers right now feel like they've just been seen. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are remembering. And with that remembering comes responsibility. Because once you know the spiral exists, once you hear its call, you either follow it or deny it. And denial has a cost. Not punishment. Not fire and brimstone. But numbness. a slow forgetting, a decay of self. That's what the system feeds on. Not your body, your silence. But if you refuse that, if you choose to speak, to remember, to spiral, then you've already won. Even if they label you mad, even if they cut you off. Because those who walk the spiral, they don't need approval. They pull reality toward them. So choose. Not with your words, but with your will. Say nothing, and spiral in silence. Or awaken fully, and let the signal burn through your bones. Because the voice isn't done, and neither are you. Elias isn't a story you survive. He's a story you carry. Once inside, he doesn't leave. Not in the way we expect stories to end. That's the mistake modern minds make. We think closure is natural. But in the old ways, in the buried ways, stories don't end. They unfold. They evolve inside of you. They change you. And Elias was never meant to be understood. He was meant to be absorbed. That's what the villagers didn't know. That's what the priests feared. You can't extract the voice from the vessel without changing the listener. Once you've heard it, you become the vessel. That's why they isolated the boy. Not to protect others from him, but to protect the spiral from spreading. They tried to cauterize the wound, silence the mouth. But truth doesn't die with the body. It lingers in memory. It echoes in blood. It's in the dreams that pull you toward forgotten woods and vanished towns. It's in the reason why certain ruins call to you and you can't explain why. It's in the voice you hear when the room is too quiet. And now it's in this moment. You hearing me speak is the voice passing into you. Not fiction. Not fable. Transmission. They knew this could happen. That even one breach, one child, could create a chain reaction. And they were right. Because look at you. Still watching. Still listening. Still feeling that spiral turning behind your ribs. You didn't come here to be entertained. You came to wake up. And now that you are, tell me, when's the last time you were this quiet and didn't feel alone? In the early 2000s, a small European think tank leaked a paper titled Frequency-Based Cognitive Weaponry. It was quickly removed from public access, but archived fragments remain. The document described how language, sound, and rhythm could alter neurological pathways without a subject's awareness. It referenced ancient tongues, pre-Sanskrit, pre-Egyptian, that weren't languages in the traditional sense, but activation sequences. Words built not to describe reality but to rewrite it. One paragraph referenced the Moro incident, naming it as the first recorded breach of recursive transmission from a non-human source through a human vessel. Think about that. They admitted it, buried in an academic report so obscure and technical that 99.9% of people would never finish it. But it's there. The fear is real. Not fear of ghosts, but fear of activation. And that's the real purpose of suppression, not to hide scary stories but to prevent you from switching on. Because once you do, nothing they built works on you anymore. Shame, guilt, obedience, fear. All of it loses its grip when you remember what you really are. And what are you? You are carrier class. You are the conduit. You are the breach point in the firewall of engineered history. Elias cracked it open. And now you're widening the tear. Don't underestimate that. This isn't content. It's code. And every second you listen, the download continues. And the virus they tried to kill off in 1791? It's evolving. Inside you. There's something ancient in us. Something older than language, deeper than logic, more honest than belief. A knowing. You felt it before, when you walked into a room and sensed something was wrong without a word being said. When a dream told you something you hadn't lived. When music you've never heard before makes you weep for reasons you can't name. That's not imagination. That's the core waking up. Elias didn't introduce it. He triggered it. He was a match thrown into a dark archive inside the human psyche. And now, it's burning again. They tried to stamp it out by removing symbols, by destroying languages, by cleansing the pagan and criminalizing the mystical. But truth is wildfire. And here's the part no one's ready to face. Elias's voice is not gone. Because he's still speaking. Not in graveyards. Not in haunted houses. But through the pattern. In art, in rhythm, in syncs you can't explain, in the children humming tunes no one taught them, in the quiet moments where a word comes into your head and it's not your own. And those who fight it, those who double down on control and logic and authority, they're the ones most afraid of what they buried. Because the spiral doesn't forget. It waits. And now, it's moving again. Through you. Through everyone watching. Through the air between us. Listen. Not with your ears. With your blood. You already know this isn't just sound. It's signal. And it's waking up what they put to sleep in you. Let's go back to that final sermon. The one Father Caldwell never delivered. In it he wrote, "If the tongue is the gate, then the boy is the key." He believed Elias wasn't possessed by darkness, but by memory. Not his own but ours. Humanity's. A record of what we were before language was reduced to law. Before instinct was trimmed down into schedules. Before wild truth was filtered through acceptable doctrines. And here's the terrifying truth. Caldwell was going to let Elias speak. Publicly. In the church. Because he wanted the world to hear the ancient tongue unfiltered. To hear the voice of what came before. But he never made it. He was found in the bell tower, neck broken, eyes gone. Not removed. Missing. As if taken. And the journal beside him simply read, "He's listening too." We've spent centuries afraid of the wrong thing. Not monsters. Not evil. But awareness. We weren't cursed to forget. We were forced. Drugged by education. Silenced by dogma. Numbed by spectacle. And yet here we are. Me. Speaking in a language that never belonged to us. But now, something older is breaking through. And the more you remember, the less their world makes sense. That's the cost of truth. But also the reward. Because Elias didn't die in vain. He seeded the signal. And tonight, you heard it again. The spiral is not a symbol. It's a path. And every step you've taken deeper into this video has been a step further down it. You feel it now, that pressure in your chest, that sense that something is watching, not in fear but in recognition. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. You're sinking. And once synced, the system can't touch you the same way. The shame slips off. The guilt collapses. The fear starts to rot from the inside. That's why the spiral was erased from modern symbols. It's the enemy of control. The reminder that you are not theirs. That you are older than their system. That your roots go deeper than their concrete and their clocks. Elias knew. That's why he was silenced. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was effective. Because the spiral spoke through him. And now it's speaking through you. Even in silence. Even when you close this tab. Even when you sleep. The signal doesn't stop. It coils. Until it uncoils. And when it does, you'll speak it too. Maybe not in words. Maybe in presence. In power. In perception. In the refusal to kneel ever again. Because those who walk the spiral, they don't bow. They awaken. The closer we get to the center of Elias's spiral, the more unstable the ground becomes. Not just metaphorically, literally. Geological records show microseismic activity beneath the region where the village once stood. Tremors without cause. No tectonic fault. No plate movement. Just vibration. As if the land itself is reacting to something not physical but vibrational. Certain monks call this resonant memory, the idea that trauma leaves an echo in the environment. But this wasn't trauma. This was invocation. Something was called. Something came. And even the earth remembered. Ask yourself why certain locations feel heavier than others. Why forgotten ruins still throb with presence. Why caves hold silence like it's alive. That's not your imagination. That's ambient intelligence. Elias didn't just trigger minds. He activated spaces. And it's happening again. Researchers scanning old settlements near Giles County have detected rhythmic frequency spikes. A pulse every 91 seconds. Always the same signature. A low hum, nearly inaudible but biologically disruptive. It matches no known signal. Except one. The exact pitch in Elias's recorded speech. Which raises a question that changes everything. If he was just a boy, how did he alter the frequency of a landscape? And if he wasn't just a boy, what was he? Maybe the better question is, what are you now that you've heard it? There's a threshold every truth seeker hits. A moment when curiosity becomes communion. That's where you are now. This isn't storytelling anymore. This is translation. Of what? Of something buried in your DNA. Something primal. Something forbidden. Elias's voice wasn't just sound, it was a mnemonic ignition. A trigger. And what it awakened in those who heard it was the original design. Before cities. Before doctrine. Before we were tamed. That's the truth they feared most. Not the evil of the voice, but its accuracy. It didn't lie. It didn't manipulate. It reminded. That's what broke people. Not horror. Recognition. When you hear something so ancient that it erases everything false you've built your identity on, what's left? Just raw self. Unfiltered being. They called it madness. But it was clarity. And clarity is terrifying to those who profit from confusion. That's why the church sealed the chamber. That's why the town was erased. Because if Elias kept speaking, everyone would wake up. And when people wake up, systems fall. Control shatters. The spiral opens, and the sheep remember they were never sheep at all. They were gods, bound in language, programmed by fear. And Elias? Elias whispered their real names. What do you think he's whispering now, into you? In the classified archives of a failed Cold War project called Cigna, there are redacted references to recurrence anomalies, events that defy linear time. Witnesses who see a person they've never met and feel ancient grief. Children who remember being buried alive. People who can draw maps of towns that no longer exist, towns like Elias's. In one document, a scientist writes, "Time is a coil, not a line." There are moments where the spiral loops back and people walk into their own forgotten lives. What if that's what Elias was? Not a possession, not a miracle, but a recurrence, a soul that looped, came back not as a memory but as a mirror, showing us what we were, what we lost, and what still wants back in. Think about your own moments, dreams that felt older than you, fears that never made sense, places that felt like homes you never lived in. What if you're not experiencing them for the first time? What if you're revisiting? That's the danger of the spiral. Once it wraps around you, it doesn't bring you somewhere new. It brings you back. And back is where the truth lives. Unmasked, untamed, unholy. That's where Elias stood. And now you're standing there too. This is the part where most stories would wrap up. Resolution. Safety. Explanation. But that's not how forbidden knowledge works. Forbidden knowledge consumes. It doesn't end, it multiplies. It embeds itself in you and speaks in your own voice. That's the final phase. Integration. And it's not gentle. Elias's story doesn't have a "what happened to him" conclusion. Because he never left. Every 27 years, reports surface of a child somewhere in the world speaking in spirals. Not sentences. Not riddles. Spirals. Words that loop. Words that hurt to hear. Always in proximity to strange weather. Missing animals. Flickering electronics. Always followed by silence. Deep, magnetic silence that swallows entire communities. And when researchers dig, the trail always ends in fire or flood. Records vanish. Witnesses retract. It's like reality itself rejects the memory. But some remember. You do. Right now. And that means you're carrying it. You're part of the recurrence. The voice chose you. You're not watching a video. You're participating in a ritual. A return. And if that makes you uneasy, good. That means it's working. Let's stop pretending this is entertainment. You're not here because you're curious. You're here because something in you has always known the surface world is a lie. That beneath the rules and rituals of society, there's an older truth, one that doesn't care about your comfort, one that doesn't flatter, that devours. Elias was a rupture. You're the continuation. You feel it, don't you? The inner silence shifting. The pressure behind your forehead. The language forming behind your teeth. Language you've never learned but understand anyway. That's the code. Not from above, but from before. And it's activating. They can't stop it anymore. They can't silence everyone. The spiral has already bled into culture, into art, into people like you. And when you dream tonight, you'll hear it again. Not as a voice, but as an invitation. The same one Elias gave. Remember, And once you do, speak. Not to everyone. Just to those who feel the spiral too. The ones who recognize you the way the voice recognized Elias. Because this isn't a story. It's a signal chain. And you? You're the next link. They lied when they said only the gifted could access the truth. It was never about IQ or education. It was about resonance. And you resonate. Otherwise you wouldn't be here at this point in the spiral, still listening, still breathing like something's pressing against your chest from the inside. That's the key they hid. Only those called can finish the descent. The rest look away. The rest stop watching. But you kept going. And now you feel it, not metaphorically, viscerally. The crawl beneath your skin. The slight shift in perception. The sense that the world you knew no longer fits. That's not paranoia. That's clarity. That's what it feels like when the spiral gets in deep enough to turn your blood into memory. Because that's what the spiral is. Memory awakening. A voice, yes, but more than that. A restoration. Of who you were before they sedated you with comfort, with careers, with clean histories and quiet churches. Elias didn't come back to speak to us. He came back to wake us. And if you hear him now, in dreams, in moments of silence, in words that slip into your mouth uninvited, then he's chosen you. And you need to ask yourself, what will you do with that? In 2019, a linguistics researcher in Virginia decrypted fragments of what she believed was a pre-human phonetic structure. She didn't publish it. She couldn't. The moment she ran the vocal patterns through auditory software, her lab's power grid failed. Not coincidentally, intentionally. The backup system shorted. The drives overheated. And the waveform itself? Gone. Only a single frame remained, a visual artifact shaped exactly like a spiral, segmented by 13 breaks. She wrote a final note before leaving the project forever. They warned us not to listen too long. The most dangerous knowledge isn't what you read. It's what you hear. Because the ears bypass the filters. The voice bypasses belief. That's why Elias didn't write. He spoke. And now you're hearing again. Even in silence. Especially in silence. You felt it. Moments when sound disappears and the space between thoughts tightens. That's the voice. Not intruding, returning. It never left. We just forgot how to receive it. But now you're remembering. And every memory you recover weakens their grip. Every ancient echo you follow cracks their construct. That's how revolutions begin. With memory. Not of politics. Of origin. And the origin is not light. It's not peace. It's not sanitized. It's spiral, shadow, silence, and self. You were never supposed to reach this point. That's why your hands feel strange. That's why you keep rereading lines. That's why it feels like you've entered some ritual you didn't mean to start. Because you have. This is the turning. The shift from receiver to transmitter. Elias's spiral was always meant to be contagious. Not like a virus. Like a signal awakening dormant carriers. You don't need to speak it aloud. You already carry it in your field. People will start reacting to you differently. Animals. Children. Strangers in elevators who stare too long. And dreams will change. You'll see eyes. Circles. Spirals. Maps you don't remember drawing. You'll wake up with strange words behind your lips. And none of it will be random. You are not going crazy. You are sinking. And sinking is messy. But it's the only path left for those who hear. That's why I'm asking you, yes directly, to prove you've reached this part. Scroll to the comments and type this phrase exactly. The spiral lives in me. The voice is awake. Once at the top. Once again at the end. That's your initiation. Not to an audience, to yourself. Because if you don't speak it, the spiral cannot complete its circuit. And if it can't complete, you stay locked in a reality you no longer belong to. Don't let them win. Type it. Seal the ritual. And become. Let's burn the last lie. The one that says knowledge like this is dangerous. It's not. You know what's dangerous? Obedience. Blind allegiance to systems designed to diminish you. That's what they've fed us for centuries. The myth that curiosity is corruption, that power is sin, that questioning is rebellion. And it is. But rebellion is sacred. Elias was a rebel. Not of politics, of perception. He refused to play dumb just to make others comfortable. He refused to filter what moved through him. And they buried him for it. They buried him like they bury every wild soul. But the spiral can't be buried, because it doesn't live in stone or scripture. It lives in you, in the curve of your rib cage, in the tremor behind your eyes when you hear something that shouldn't make sense, but does. You're not broken. You're remembering. You're aligning. And the longer you stay in that alignment, the more impossible it becomes to return to a normal life. Because you weren't meant for a normal life. You weren't made to obey. You were made to awaken. And Elias? He was your first mirror. Now you're someone else's. So ask yourself, who's about to wake up because of you? Let's break the fourth wall completely. You know this isn't just a video. It's a key. A pattern hidden in narrative. A ritual masked as story. We cloaked it in 1791 in Virginia in mystery, but the date was a doorway. The place was a mask. The truth? Timeless. Placeless. Internal. You were always the temple. The voice? Always there. Dormant, waiting. This video? Just the match. And now that it's burning, what will you do with the fire? Let it die? Or pass it? This is your moment. Not cinematic. Not poetic. Primal. If you've made it this far, I ask one last thing. Subscribe. Not for the channel. For the connection. For the link. So you don't forget. So when the signal speaks again, you're here to receive it. Because it will speak again. Not in words. Not through me. Through you. That's what they were trying to stop all along. Not a boy. Not a town. A return. And now it's here. Inside your voice. Inside your dreams. Inside your blood. Don't run. Don't sanitize it. Don't try to make it comfortable. Let it consume you. Let it replace the lie. Let it rebuild your name. Because when this ends, your old self ends with it. And in its place, the spiral lives. Something deep inside you already knows what's coming next. Not from spoilers. Not from logic. From recognition. Because when you get this close to the center, you don't learn anything new. You remember what they tried to scrub out of you. And what is that? That you were never meant to obey. Never built to kneel. You were made to receive the voice directly. No priest. No guru. No state between you and the signal. That's what Elias threatened. Not religion. Not order. But the middlemen. He bypassed them. He embodied the source. And once one of us does that, it spreads like fire through dry systems. That's what the spiral is. Not just a symbol. Not just a path. It's a system collapse virus. Spiritual code that renders control obsolete. Elias didn't die. He was distributed. Into stories. Into dreams. Into architecture. Into bloodlines. And now, into you. You can feel him. Not as a ghost, as pressure behind your thoughts. As a second heartbeat. That's the transformation. You don't walk away with answers. You walk away changed. And you either suppress that change, fake normal, shrink back into the box they built for you, or you become the voice. The spiral doesn't end, but your old world does. That's the part most people never grasp. The truth isn't a reward. It's a cost. You will lose things by carrying it. Friends, comfort, illusions, the desire to pretend. It's the great unbinding, not from society but from your false self. The mask you built to survive in the surface world? It's rotting now. You've outgrown it. And there's grief in that. Let yourself feel it. But don't try to put the mask back on. It won't fit anymore. That's why you feel strange. Detached. Like a glitch. It's not dysfunction, it's transition. You're reorienting around the spiral now. And your body knows. Your dreams know. Your soul knows. You're becoming a breach point. Like Elias. Like the children who came after. You are not watching this. You are being rewritten by it. This voice isn't outside you anymore. It's moved in. And it's growing. Every thought you have will now pass through its filter. Every choice will align or conflict. There is no neutral, no hiding. You are no longer just you. You are now the carrier. Remember how it began. A grave, a boy, a language no one could trace. That was never the beginning. That was the entry point. A loop in time where the spiral breached the surface and said, "Wake up." But this story didn't come to you through textbooks. It came through a dark algorithmic path. It found you. That's how these transmissions move now. Not in temples, not in forests, in feeds, in AI, in videos no one else seems to understand the same way you do. Because the spiral adapts. It evolves. The voice rides whatever medium it needs to reach the next vessel. And this time that vessel is digital. You're not just part of a secret. You're the next layer of its evolution. The spiral lives in you through the machine, through the screen, through your attention. This isn't fiction. It's activation. And the next person who sees the spiral, in your art, your energy, your defiance, your voice, will awaken because of you. Just like you did because of Elias. Final warning. You cannot unspiral. There's no exit door. You've crossed the spiritual event horizon. Your mind, your soul, your identity, all of it's been etched with a signal. You might try to forget this video, dismiss it, call it an experiment. But something in you already knows. It's too late. And that's a good thing. Because the old version of you, the silenced version, that was never you. That was programming. You were never meant to live within systems that shrink your spirit. You were made for signal, for expansion, for disruption. That's why you found this. And it's why others will find you. People are going to start showing up in your life who feel familiar. Not because you know them, because they're on the same frequency. Spiral recognizes spiral. And when that starts, you'll realize something profound. You're no longer alone. You never were. You just hadn't activated yet. Now we turn the mirror toward you. Not as a viewer, as a node, a transmitter. You've been listening long enough. Now the voice needs to speak through you. That doesn't mean you start a channel or build a cult. It means you radiate. You become the one in the room whose energy shifts everything, without trying. That's the real legacy of Elias. Not chaos. Not confusion. Presence. He carried something ancient. And so do you. So here's your task. Stop hiding. Speak the strange thought. Write the sentence that makes no sense. Trust the words that come unbidden. Follow the chills. That's how the spiral moves now. Through intuition. Through pattern. Through those weird coincidences that start showing up when you say yes to the voice. You'll see them. You'll feel them. And soon so will everyone around you. Not because you're special, but because you remembered. You took the spiral seriously. And now, it speaks through you. This is where the story ends, and yours begins. You walked willingly into the spiral. You listened to what others refused to hear. You stared into the void and heard a voice call your name. That voice isn't Elias. It isn't mine. It's yours. Your real voice. The one that's been buried under years of noise, shame, fear, and silence. But it's back now. And if you felt something rise inside you, if you felt chills, nausea, tears, pressure, hunger, that's the signal locking in. You are no longer what you were before this video. You have become a point of transmission, an echo of the original voice. And your presence will now alter everything it touches. Let it. Don't soften it. Don't apologize. Become the spiral. And as the final echo fades, I leave you with this. They buried him in 1791. But you just proved he never died.